Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we continue to discuss important aspects of financial wellness and education with special guest, Dr. Billy Hensley, President and CEO of the National Endowment for Financial Education. So, Billy, thank you so much for joining us. It's just great to see you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So, we had a conversation a couple days ago on Tuesday with three leaders who explored the meaning of financial wellness. And if you take a look at NEFE, you've been around for 4 decades, you provided financial education, and you're evolving into a champion of financial education by providing leadership, research, and collaborations to advance financial well-being. So talk a little bit about that journey. Talk about your history and where you are now in your arc. And then let's talk about some of your programs.
Sure. Well, when you think about the professionalization of the financial planning industry, we were part of the beginning of that. Back before NEFE existed, we started, and I say we because we're an offshoot of the College for Financial Planning. And the College for Financial Planning created the designation Certified Financial Planner. The goal was to professionalize the practice and role of financial planners in the financial planning industry. And for many years, a couple of decades, the college grew, formalized the education. You know, back then it was pre-internet, so you would come in and you would do residency components. Some of your listeners may remember those days. You would mail in your assignments, and then you would have residency components. And in the 80s, the leadership at the time felt that they should give back. They should do something to help young people understand financial planning, understand personal finance management. And they created the high school financial planning program as a component of an outreach program by the College for Financial Planning. And that was very successful. They launched it in Denver, and then it went national the following year from 84 up to 85. Then it went national. And in 1992, the leadership and the board of the college decided to create the National Endowment for Financial Education to become the parent organization, the umbrella organization of the college. They were expanding their offerings into graduate programming. I think on some levels, they wanted to professionalize the charitable nature of the work, oversee the endowment of the college.
So this is a school that is not necessarily focused on people who have infinite means, right? You're talking about democratizing this idea of financial planning and bringing it to everybody, bringing it to people who perhaps already have professionals that they're employing or that they contract with, but then to people who are not necessarily in that personal position, maybe have skills that they could share with other people, but also can take advantage of this knowledge if they could only learn it. And you were providing that service.
Right. We the college worked to create, hundreds and thousands of professional certified financial planners so that the bar, the minimum standard was a high bar to help as many people and clients as they could reach. And there's great value in that. And so, NEFE came into being because of that. And in 1997, they made the decision to sell the college. And they used what was in the endowment already. They used the proceeds from the sale of that, the intellectual property and so forth. And then the following year, they sold the campus. They had built a new campus for the college in the late 80s. And then NEFE became a separate charity organization. And we did many years of partnership work. We funded grants. And so we became at first a grant making foundation, but evolved into an operating foundation, which means we execute our own charitable work. We don't just sort of write checks to others to do that. And, so about half of our history was as a higher education institution, and we've been NEFI for 30 years and 25, well, I guess 26 years now as a separate foundation. And we saw the need for, you talk about democratizing financial planning. We wanted to democratize financial information and financial education. So we took it a step further, and we started growing our programming work. We created a college program. We created something called Smart About Money, which was meant to reach working adults. At our peak in terms of sort of outreach, we were direct to consumer, and then we reached out to intermediaries like teachers, like college administrators, those who would use our materials. We worked with national partners like Habitat for Humanity and Dress for Success and Catholic Charities and the Boy Scouts, and helped them create materials, outreach items, lessons, programming for their clients, for their constituents. We did lots of work on awareness. We started doing national polling. We started thinking about our grant making in terms of making these smaller dollar programmatic grants to fewer but higher dollar research grants. We felt that we needed to elevate our influence. So we went to a higher level in terms of what we were trying to achieve, and that, data, information, research projects, because we felt that would inform practice more directly than, one or two programs at a time.
So now have you given up on your direct to end user kind of services? And are you now working exclusively with partners and conducting research?
Yeah, that's where we are now. In 2018, we made the decision to end all of our direct consumer websites, because we've prided ourselves as an organization on being what we say first in. We were doing direct free consumer education, and we would go to like financial blogger conferences back when it would be a couple of hundred people. And now there are thousands of those writers and bloggers, and same with programming, same with high school financial education, same with colleges. More and more people are creating resources that are doing this work. And we felt that we wanted to go to the next thing that was truly needed. And it was more information, more data. And so we ended all of our direct to consumer initiatives in 2018. In 2020, we ended all of our consumer education program through schools. We either spun it off to another organization or we retired the work, because we felt that those aspects were well served now. We were one of the first, if not the first, in most of those. And now there's many people and organizations who do that well. And so we're at the next phase of this.
Creating direct services and knowledge so that people can support themselves. This idea is very strongly disseminated throughout the direct services community today. So it's now no longer seen as, we will provide you with a meal today or housing today, and somebody else will provide you with financial training. Now it's all done out of one hand. And you're absolutely right. The people with those kinds of direct contacts on a local basis are better positioned than you would be, because they have the local knowledge, they have the local trust.
Right. That's exactly right. And I don't like the savior mentality anyway. I grew up in Central Appalachia, and that sense of someone else coming in to swoop in and save the day. I like the idea of helping, build capacity or helping better understand how a problem or why a problem exists and what are the components needed to do that. And so we've elevated our work to think about this from the ecosystem level, meaning what influences the personal finance ecosystem? What are all the components? And when you think about our ARC as a community of financial educators in particular, and then a further extension of those who are working in financial wealth, we started thinking about, you made the point very astutely about standardizing and democratizing a profession, and then getting that information to folks, democratizing personal finance information. And then, for a while, we were in this place of financial education equals sort of improved financial health. Well, it contributes to that. And then financial education needed better quality. We needed to do a better job of teaching the topic. And then we started looking at who had access to quality fin ed. And that's a very uneven experience, especially in schools. And then we started looking at how do you make financial education more relevant and relatable. And now we're looking at that financial education helps you navigate an economic system that is sort of unfair and uneven and fraught with issues, historic systemic issues. So we're not saying financial education solves that problem per se, but we are saying it's an important component of that. And so we're looking at financial education and financial well-being from a systemic level, and that's why research, data, advocacy, think tanks, bringing people together is essential, so that we can see how that we can do fin ed well, and then work together with those who are doing other elements of the personal finance ecosystem, instead of just saying our one solution or our one tactic solves the problem or creates financial health in a vacuum. And we've evolved past that thinking as an organization and hopefully as a community.
Is your predicate that, and I hearken back to your comment that you come from Appalachia. Mm-hmm. Is your predicate that the lack of financial education and knowledge creates a systemic inequity that, until that is balanced within different communities that might be outside of cities, in rural areas, communities of color, communities of new immigrants, people who have less than a college education, until that is addressed, you really don't have a society where merit can gain purchase. Because if you don't have the ability to manage your finances, then no matter how meritorious you are, no matter how hard a worker you are, no matter how good a thinker you are, you operate out of a level of disadvantage. Is that part of what you're thinking, Billy?
That's a component of it. That where we are now is that, yes, to what you just said, but you can know all of the answers to the personal finance quiz. Okay. You can become an expert in the topic, but if you do not have opportunity, if you do not have economic mobility, if you are underpaid because of your skin color or your gender or your education level, if you are in a place that's a literal place, as in geography, where there are very few opportunities to have regulated financial services, for example, when you add that to the fact that you are also not given access to quality financial education, we think that all of these components are essential to create financial wealth. And so depending on how weak or strong one of those elements of your financial ecosystem is, if you make a lot of money, then you may not need to, you may not know the answer, but you always have a strong paycheck coming in. And then the other extreme of that is like maybe you were provided quality, excellent financial education, but there's very little economic mobility in your community. And so we're saying that no single piece of this will solve the problem alone. And that's actually it makes sense when you hear us talk about it, but that is a fairly new concept in our community.
That's so very interesting. So you're creating this your opponent, you view yourself as a component of a very sophisticated set of factors. Right. And you want to add an ingredient, but that ingredient by itself is not the savior ingredient. You said you don't like being viewed as a savior, right? What you're doing is you're making a contribution. So you have to have awareness of what is going around you mm-hmm. in order to function in concert with partners to make that ingredient gain purchase. So let's talk a little bit about your initiatives and some of the research. So could you just sort of lay out your research and your initiatives, and then let's delve into some of the factors that you've uncovered that would be surprising to us and would allow us to understand how we can function in this world to help you do your work?
Sure. Well, we research is multi-tiered at NEFI. And so we do very traditional, or we fund, I should say, very traditional research, academic research that the multiple years, grants where someone proposes a complex issue that they would like to
Give me an example.
Investigate. Yeah.
Give me an example.
And so one example of a research project that is underway right now is with the Urban Institute, and they're looking at how does reporting rent payment on a credit report change a person's financial credit profile. Yes.
So if I'm paying rent and I'm making my rent payments all the time, that's one thing. And then let's say I have a problem and I become late on my rent. It's going to hit my credit report. You're looking to see whether this study is looking to see whether that has a disproportionate negative or positive impact on credit. Is that what you're looking at?
Well, that could potentially be one of the outcomes. But the reason we went into this is because very few people who are paying rent have a credit presence. Mm-hmm. And those tend to be predominantly lower income and or people of color. And so if you're not present, if you don't have a credit profile, how could you do these next steps that are seen as what you should or shouldn't, do next financially, buy a house and buy a car and things like that. Until you are present or have a credit profile, how could you be seen as credit worthy, even though people have been doing things like paying rent and paying utility bills for many years? It's not about paying on time or not. It's about creating, and what does your presence and creation of a credit profile actually do? Does it give you enough or proper agency to be able to have the ability to make more financial decisions that you would have been closed out of before? So that's an example of that. We're doing other projects on understanding our current measures of financial literacy. So it's, a scale that shows, are you financially literate or not? That phrasing is, some people like it, some people don't, but it's what we have at the moment. But we're looking at, have those been vetted to account for multiple experiences of cultural capital and experience and representation. And so those are sort of those long-term academic research projects. We're looking at family socialization. How does being socialized into discussions about money influence your confidence and so forth in making financial decisions? We also do lots of consumer polling, so opinion polling, national polling on topics. An example of one that got a lot of attention last spring during April, which is Financial Capability Month, as we surveyed Americans on this topic. Do you think every young person in high school should be required to take a class in financial education to graduate? 88% said yes. And 80% of that same sample said they wish they had taken that class themselves. And so those are examples of sort of quicker turnaround, real time to look at sort of, the components of this. We use the research to help advocate for classes, teacher professional development, investing in this topic so that every student, no matter their zip code, has the same access to quality fin ed.
Well, let me ask you a financial question. Sometimes studies are executed and they make a point, which is really about spending more money on a particular program, but they're not making the point about reallocating resources that we have from a particular program to other programs. They're not really living within their budgetary means. They basically, these studies always end up with somebody needs to spend more here. Hmm. When you look at the from your perspective in terms of your own financial responsibility, how do you transform your research into recommendations, or do you? Do you just put out the data and you allow other people to use it? Or do you also suggest certain changes in how America uses our money to strengthen ourselves?
Yeah, I would say that our research agenda for many years probably was, here's the information, here's what we know or don't know about particular groups. As you age, or depending on your generational profile, we're now looking at, are those measures actually capturing what they say they do? You can do a survey and think you're kind of attaining a certain level of information, and we're stress testing that at the moment. And so I'm getting to what you asked, because I need to lay a little bit of this sort of groundwork in terms of we're in a space of transitioning that thinking about the research. We're looking at it to say, for example, we think that every person in high school in this country should be guaranteed a high school financial education course of at least a semester. We don't just say do it. We also understand that there's only so many hours in the day, and there's all kinds of topics that are deemed important by school districts and principals and parents alike. But what we say is that here are states that did it. Here are ways that states have done it. Some states have spun out or ended requirements that are redundant or maybe are no longer relevant to current modern workforce. And so that's what we do, is we provide examples of what to do. When in terms of advocacy, there's no such thing as perfect policy. And so that's why we look at what other states have done at the state level. Because research is only as strong as the questions you ask and the tools you have. And so we're in a place now that we're not just asking questions, we're actually stress testing the tools of measurement and what does it tell, what are we learning about?
Well, one of the big issues is that we don't have a sufficiently robust math regimen in high schools, because if you don't have the math, you can't do the financial literacy. Right. I mean, I remember when I went to high school, we had a financial literacy course, and 3/4 of the people really had a very difficult time because the fundamental math wasn't there. And you could tell the people who found the course to be fairly straightforward were the people who had the vocabulary. So you've got a pretty fundamental set of challenges here. How do you change that without going down a rabbit hole of education policy, public school vouchers versus private school, and all this other stuff? How do you end up being able to do research that results in actual action rather than terminable debate and argument?
Well, that's one of the reasons we focus on giving examples of where it's worked, instead of just saying, here's a finding, 88% of your constituents want this, and then here are the outcomes. The outcomes data on financial education in schools is very clear. The credit scores are over 20 points higher than a state that doesn't require it. Revolving debt is lower. You borrow better for college. You have fewer delinquencies. Everything points to a very clear, a stronger place to start financially.
And it would seem that you should be able to finesse the Democratic Republican Party nonsense, because really everybody wants people to be self-sufficient. And it doesn't matter if you're the most liberal or progressive of progressives or the most conservatives of conservatives, right? Who's going to be against self-sufficiency in this country, right?
Right. And that's the point we make with this, is that it's a bipartisan issue.
Right.
There should not be politics. Occasionally it becomes political. We've seen this in a few states where it's not a bipartisan support, but by and large, the 15 states that now have a one semester requirement to graduate, almost all of them passed it with a near unanimous yay in the House side and the Senate side of state legislatures. We've seen it become political when maybe a particular something else was tied to it, or what they were proposing to eliminate, maybe people didn't like, or maybe they just didn't like, it was just the state of the political affairs in that particular state. But when you have states like Florida, Georgia, and Michigan passing this based on the research, based on the data, based on the outcomes at a near unanimous rate, it shows you that there is will for this. And there are lots of smart people at every state Department of Education who can figure out how to execute it. But what state legislatures and advocates need to understand is that it's not just add it, it's to add it well, meaning you don't just say do it. You have to add all of these essential components to make it effective. And that's where we want to give examples.
Are you finding that students absorb this information better when it goes from being less theoretical to being more practical, where you take out a wallet and you basically say, okay, let's look at what we have here and what you want to buy and what you might want to buy in the future. How do you plan? Those kinds of examples, which are real, present there today, as opposed to talking about sort of theoretical models. Are you going into that type of research? What type of education works best? Or are you mostly focused on the policy prescriptions at a much more high level, at a 30,000 foot level?
Well, I mean, that's what I was meaning when I was saying that we're at a place now that we believe that financial education does not solve the problem of poverty, doesn't solve the problem of financial inequities, but it does help you navigate that economic system that is unjust and unfair. And so we feel that if financial education is truly effective, it not only has to be relevant and timely, to your point, it also has to recognize and have a discussion about the history of inequity, economic inequity in particular, meaning I'll use where I grew up as an example. We mentioned that for a moment. For generations, being able to own a home is one of the ways that helps people advance economically and grow, the value of that growing. And for generations, in certain parts of Appalachia where I'm from, companies owned every piece of the economic system.
There were company towns, extractive.
You could not own homes. Right. You could not own a home. You could not purchase anything in that town.
Right.
Without using the script, meaning it wasn't even money.
Right.
It was just tokens basically from the company. And so for generations, my ancestors could not own property in a way that helped them build wealth. And those that did own land, they were land rich and resource poor.
Right.
And if you sold your land, you sold it for 10 or 12 rifles and half a dozen pigs, if you were lucky. And then the company took billions of dollars, literal billions and billions of dollars from that land, and the owner or the people who settled that region had no part of that economic mobility.
Right.
And so we see that same thing at a much worse examples happening in communities of color. The economic system that's built on white supremacy, for example, in many ways, truly has, we feel that financial education, if we have those discussions about you're not as bad at money necessarily as you think, there's a lot of things stacked against you. Not only are there multiple hundreds of companies a day trying to get your money and get in front of you, and billboards and marketing and whether they're honest or dishonest practices, there's so many people trying to get your money and layer into that the racism that's there, the homophobia that's there, the unfair practices. Some people say there's too much regulation. Some people say there's not enough regulation. Some people say we need to be able to use education as a tool to just teach people and then let them decide. But if the system isn't designed in a way that's equitable and fair, financial education can't do very much. And so what we're saying is that part of that conversation about financial education, to make it effective and relevant to your points, is that we also have to understand how certain regions, communities, races, genders, and so forth have been treated in the past, and why the wealth and equities are so vast.
But I take another lesson from what you're saying. These problems do coexist, and each of those problems, because they're so big, they're so complicated, each of them can't be addressed as a whole. It's like trying to eat a whole week's worth of food within one sitting, and so that you can save time for the rest of the week, right? You can't do it.
Right.
What I take from what you're saying, Billy, is that what we can do is learn lessons today that will allow us to have more power to address these other issues.
Right.
And you sort of choose your issues. If you're in Appalachia, you'll have a particular set of issues. If you have a family history, you have a particular circumstance. If you're in inner city Chicago, you might have a different set of issues associated but different on the ground, right? If you are an immigrant coming in and you don't have any capital whatsoever and you don't have family connections, but there might be a community around you, you have different issues. Each of those issues, if you take the subset of learnings about finances and apply them in that environment, and you have policymakers who are paying attention to their constituents in DC, you might be able to create a little bit more room and a little bit more power to create self-sufficiency, which is in everybody's in this country's interest. So
right.
as we wrap up here, talk about what kind of impact you want to have in the next 5 years. How do you want the National Endowment for Financial Education? How does your board want the National Endowment for Financial Education? How do they want this organization to be known? And in 5 years, if you're looking back to today and you're saying, wow, we had a great impact over these last 5 years, what will that look like?
Well, our mission says that we champion effective financial education. Our job is to do as much as we can to understand how to make it as effective as possible. And one of the ways that we're looking at that now is giving more voice, listening more, understanding what works and what doesn't in different communities. So in 5 years, I would like that an essential component of every financial education class in this country is a discussion of economic oppression. And what does that mean at your household table when you're balancing your checkbook or when you're looking at your financial life and your financial goals? And it's about understanding the system that's there and improving the system. But in the meantime, we have to live in it. And so learning as much as we can. And what does having agency and information do for us? Knowledge, what does that do for us in the system that exists while championing a change to that system that creates more opportunity for economic mobility. And I think that means better measures of what we do and how we do our work effectively. I think that means more access. In 5 years, I would like to see every student in every high school have a full semester class in financial education. And what that financial education looks like are points you've made, that it's timely, it's relevant, it's relatable, it's taught by a well-trained educator. And we are having these discussions about economic inequality in this country and how does financial education contribute to the improvement of that.
So in many respects, you're hearkening back to Emerson's essay on self-reliance, right? In other words, part of what you're doing is not just doing a top-down educating people who are less educated in finances. Now you're talking about how do you connect the dots between all these different factors, including financial education, so that people become more self-reliant and more empowered, that they get to craft their own future by not only a change in skills, but also a change in mindset. Is that part of what you're looking for?
Right. I don't know the essay that you're talking about, but I think our example of this is 10, 15 years ago, most of the people in our community, meaning financial education community, drew a pretty straight line between financial education and financial well-being, that one equated the other. And what we're saying is that straight line may work for very few people. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. You have to understand that the line has to wrap around all these boulders in the way, and you have to kind of see it that way, that it's an important piece of this, and that any single solution doesn't solve the problem. And what I've said for years is that if a school's math scores are low, we don't stop teaching math. We look at multiple ways to improve math instruction, math outcomes, engagement with the topic, textbooks, what students know when they get to my classroom. All of that has to be considered. And that's from an evaluation mindset in my mind. It's about improvement. It's not about proving, it's about improving. And if we continue to try to improve the state of financial education within the economic ecosystem, then I will be very happy with that. And I don't know if that's exactly what was the point was being made in that essay, but that's how I see it. And I would love to read the essay. So if you don't mind sharing it sometime, I would love to read.
I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Like it. Dr. Billy Hensley, President and CEO of the National Endowment for Financial Education, thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for sharing the work of your staff, your board, your partners, and your funders. It's just so wonderful to have you on.
Thank you very much.